It's 8:10. We want to talk about something else right now. The so-called tainted blood scandal of the 1970s and 80s led to around 7,000 people with haemophilia contracting HIV and hepatitis through contaminated blood products brought in from abroad.
More than 25 years on now, BBC's Panorama has been speaking to some of those affected, including our next guest, Adrian Goodyear, who's going to join us in a moment.
Before we speak to Adrian, let's have a look at the devastating effect the contaminated treatment had on his life.
We were asked to go as a group of 5. They went round the room one by one, and they went, you have, you haven't, you have, you haven't, slowly, calmly, who had HIV and who didn't. 3 out of the 5 boys in that room that day were HIV positive, and I was one of them. I looked out the windows, the sunshine was coming in, and there was a moment, that's my last son. That is my last son. We've had it. We're dead. We're all dead.
So it's a really sort of devastating story, actually. More on Panorama, and we'll speak to Adrian shortly, who's here with us. First, let's talk to our health editor, Hugh Pym, who joins us from London. And Hugh, you've covered this story right from the beginning. Just tell us about a little bit of the background, and it's had serious implications, hasn't it?
Yes, Louise, it's been described by some medical experts as the worst disaster in the history of the NHS, because these were patients being treated by the NHS. Many of them haemophiliacs, where there's no blood clotting if there is serious bleeding, a very difficult condition to manage. Others were having blood transfusions, so they went in good faith to be treated, yet they were infected, obviously without their knowledge, with HIV and hepatitis C. More than 2,000 have since died. Many more have had their lives blighted by this, and they feel that the battle to get a full, if you like, setting out of the facts and what really happened back in the 1980s really hasn't happened. There has been an inquiry in Scotland, the Penrose inquiry, which reported last year. There has been a privately funded investigation led by Lord Archer, but there's never been an official UK-wide public inquiry. And Andy Burnham, now Mayor of Greater Manchester, formerly Health Secretary under the last Labour government, has campaigned on this and said he wants to draw this to the attention of whoever forms the next government, and if nothing is done, he's going to refer what he knows to the police. Now, doctors at the time said they acted in good faith and that they made available this clotting agent to haemophiliacs, some of which was brought in from the US, but they didn't know that it was infected because of some of the donors in the US with HIV and hepatitis C. So they say they acted in good faith, and also they argue that there was no other treatment for haemophilia at the time. If they hadn't had the clotting agent, haemophiliacs would have suffered. But there is a suspicion amongst the victims that there's been a cover-up in Whitehall. The Department of Health at the time didn't pass on what was known, and doctors continued administering this treatment with such devastating consequences.
OK, Hugh, thanks for the moment.
Well, Hugh mentioned the victims there. Let's speak to one of those. We mentioned that Adrian joined us in the studio. Can you explain? It's lovely to have you on the programme, by the way. How did you come to have contaminated blood yourself? What was the process for you?
Well, I was infected by NHS treatment, Department of Health funded treatment in 1976, firstly with hepatitis B. I was 7 years old and went yellow and blistered. And it was very difficult. My family were quite worried, very worried actually, about what was in these bottles.
Even at the time?
Even at the time, yeah. In fact, my dad decided to try to stop it, but couldn't. I had a word with my doctor saying, what are you doing to my son? And really, they were infecting me from the very first injection. That was my first injection of factor A concentrate. Yeah.
So that was the first thing that you knew you had. When did you know that, in fact, it wasn't just hepatitis C that you had?
Oh, we knew from some newspapers on some coffee tables at first. In about 1983-84, we were seeing some stories coming from America that we were actually being infected. And, killer blood, haemophiliacs. It was panic.
And you realised that was sort of a red alert for you, was it?
Absolutely.
At that point?
We knew, because we knew that about 9 or 10 guys in America had died of AIDS. Right. And then
it must have been such a shock to your family because, as you say, your parents were flagging that up at the time, and then to read that, to see that, and you think, well, it's not just me, this is going to affect us. What could we be going through? How bad could it be?
Yes. In fact, both my brothers are no longer here now. One died of Hep C and the other of AIDS. So I'm the last remaining brother alive now. And if you can imagine what that is, there's no words for that, really. I also went to a special school where 72 of my friends with haemophiliacs are now all dead. No, 72.
I mean, it's just staggering to hear you talk about these numbers. And we know that now some people are calling for, you know, more investigation, for a public inquiry. What would help you at this stage?
The truth, because, you know, the facts really into some kind of logical order, because really we have enough documentation at home on our hard drives, on PDFs, to know that there was a cover-up. That, you know, they consistently try to sweep us under the carpet. That is a cliche, but it's absolute truth that they knew. And they kept infecting us, they kept importing. It's quite important to mention too that after this stuff was banned in the US in 1982, we carried on importing it for 3 to 4 more years after that. Why did they do that? Why didn't we just slow it down? Slow it down. I think the thing was because we were infected, treat the haemophilia, but they could have done so much more just to slow the flow, and we could have rested.
We should say that there was never any cover-up, and there's a full investigation, and they said there was never any cover-up, and we've been saying as well that they always said they acted in good faith. I mean, when you look back now, and you told us that story from the 1970s, and you realise something's wrong at the start of the 1980s, and then both your brothers have died, and you know many others have been affected by this as well. Do you still feel angry about that, or is it disappointment? Is it a permanent state of frustration? How can you summarise how you feel?
Every single day, even though I really do have a PMA attitude to it. So, to summarise, it's the faces of the dead and that are gone every day. That's what I want, a conversation with the government about them in an inquiry form, because we can't just allow them to dissipate into nothing, really.
I mean, thank you so much for making your points. Let's just pick up with Hugh as well. And Hugh, you mentioned earlier there have already been investigations into what happened, haven't there?
Yes, there's been one in Scotland which resulted in the Scottish Government agreeing new compensation. There's been one that's funded but by donors, privately funded. But I think as you heard there, it's this official public inquiry spanning the whole UK which is being called for. And yes, some sort of recognition of the financial plight. There have been various allocations of compensation over the years, but nothing, the victims would argue, that matches the sort of pain they felt. Now, I should say the Department of Health has always said there's been no cover-up, no documents destroyed. There's no need for another public inquiry, and they do say that they're offering whatever support they can to the victims to take them to whatever need they may have, and there is a consideration of further financial compensation which is going through and may well emerge under the next government. But it does remain, I think, a source of great frustration that the truth of what really happened in this disaster for the NHS, the victims would argue, has never properly been examined.
We've seen that directly from Adrian. Adrian Goodyear, thank you. Hugh Pym as well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us this morning as well. And you can see more from Adrian and the Panorama programme tonight, 9 o'clock on BBC.